Ever wonder why the moment you get smart, build leverage, or try to scale your own worth, the system suddenly shifts goalposts? You think you're climbing meritocracy, but you're actually walking into the cultivation trap. Legacy institutions don't want your innovation. They want your surrender. They fund you to outsource the innovation they can no longer produce internally, only to liquidate your project the exact second you transition from a useful asset to a systemic competing competitor. Look at the unwritten social game board they've built to keep you gridlocked. In the West, they've engineered an undocumented hyper-managed mode where everyone is encouraged to disagree with everyone else, doing whatever they want just to keep the population fractured. It's a culture obsessed with finding the sacrificial lamb. They need someone on the cross just to keep their institutions running. Unlike self-contained sovereignty in the East Asian world that allow you to achieve nirvana without a cross, the Western corporate structure demands your psychological submission. They use highly calculated social hierarchies as tools of coercion. They map out behavioral leverage dynamics, where systemic premiums of who was here before and who has the greatest physical altercation and ultimate sexiness is in a position of this over this, him over him, her over her, and there's a quality to that, and it also demonstrates when you create something in your product. These sort of systems are weaponized to command social influence over the men who ultimately control the world and their ultimate decision. They want you trapped as an employee, stagnant, obedient, and ready for professional erasure if you step out of line. But the whole landscape has shifted, and now we can just use raw creativity and productivity to ultimately decide the future. Look at the intense energy coming from East Asia and South Asia. These guys are working really hard and they are able to produce something, but we know the US military is having their positions everywhere with sanctions and tariffs to say that they are not so valuable. Nonetheless, you can experience a cheaper world for practically everything the USA has to offer in China or in India. And to top it all off, Bangladesh, East Asia, and South Asia don't really have to ask for permission from these guys who are ultimately giving them sanctions and tariffs every time they innovate something that is really productive. If you feel trapped in your corporate job or feel isolated in the modern dating or social system, you are playing a game that is designed to strip you of your leverage. In this video, we are talking about how to defeat this rhetoric. I'm going to talk about it exactly the way you should be talking about it, and you can definitely achieve your goals from here once you see this video. Stick around to the end because it's going to get good. The first way you want to come about this problem is to identify why legacy institutions and the elite end up funding those who are going to be competing with them. And the ultimate factor for that is humanity and the contributions to civilization and society. That way we can innovate further. But the problem here is that once you innovate, they have systematic solutions to say that you are no longer valuable here in this space and we want you out, which is what America was predominantly doing in 2024 and 2023. They were completely complaining about the innovation that the rest of the world had because of their consistency towards being number one. Every nation throughout the world has to have this standard the number one competing nation has to offer. These guys are all around the world with their 800 military bases saying the standard is set and we have defined it. But once these smaller nations and competing people come into the picture and they start saying, hey, we can actually make some money this way because people are actually buying, they say sanction, tariff, and you're not going to get some and we're going to boycott and all these other things to say that the greater picture and the greater rhetorical devices in politics and in regular social media is just going to say you're not going to be going that way ever again because we don't like it. And so they're marked as systemic threats. In the modern workplace, you sort of need a mentor, and a mentor is always giving you the credibility that you are a person worth hiring. But once it comes to the conclusion that you are able to create a solution throughout the world and increase your own personal wealth, well, you start to become a threat and they start to kick you out of the system. Once again, it goes back to how this has to relate to the number one economy always stating that you've got this standardization and they want to say that they're going to be number one forever for as long and however long, but the military and physical presence is always there. I keep going back to this because you'll see that any sort of characteristic that you might have will be met with this military that won't be ceased or stopped. You'll be allowed to do whatever you want. However, if you start to become number one, well, that's going against the competition and they don't want you to be number one, so it's anti-competitive. That being said, other costs and other contributing factors to an economy or a company not doing so well will also be met with other additions that you had your couple months of enjoying the good position of making money, but now you won't be able to do that because, well, you're starting to look like you're number one. And the elites have had a massive conversation a couple months ago about the direction they will be taking. And anyone who's took this direction of saying that they're going to be number one because they figured out what they missed out in their elite parties is now a threat, because that won't ultimately control the USA. And having them also pursue the competitive edge that we will maintain number one as citizens and not even citizens as a government party. There are tons of reasonable solutions to this. As you can see, artificial intelligence has been released recently or within the past 5 years. And it's important to say that we expect everyone to be accepted here now that artificial intelligence is actually capable of handling that information. In fact, the government has gone on ahead and said they were going to look into fraud cases using their new technology. However, a lot of this new other redundant information, like these small communities and small pocket niches like you are redundant, are being ignored because the greatest situation, as I mentioned earlier, is the ability to have military presence, sanction ability, and the reason to find something to sanction for someone's employment. They're not using artificial intelligence to incorporate everyone. They're using artificial intelligence to say, this is the way that we're going to go, and we're not going to be able to do that. Even before artificial intelligence was developed, the people simply had a desire to be accepted and know all the information was going to be used in their beneficial methods and their beneficial favor. Instead, they are now being told that there's a certain way that things have to be done, and crime is all about the place still going higher or lower. It doesn't matter. The sanctions and military also show that they have the most ability to commit crimes. Then again, if you check out on social media, the sort of meme culture isn't evolving, as you do see more people taking initiative as to how these people are actually blaming other people and saying, you guys are really discriminatory for everything that you do, and you guys should be letting everyone achieve their goals as promised in whatever constitution that you have made, instead of going out on the streets and complaining about how immigrants are ruining the world. Not only that, the immigrants are still welcome, but they are welcome only if they follow this sort of standard that the military and sanctions have told the rest of the world, that if you start making derivatives off American culture to compete with America, then you'll be sanctioned and told you will not be accepted in America. And that's the anti-competitive competition. You can't make derivatives. Then again, if anyone wants to copyright it, they could definitely create a derivative off your derivative from America in the first place, because they have their military that you're making a derivative off of. So this number one position here is the military. You make a derivative, but the guys over here are going to say, oh, we can come out and make a derivative of this and sell back to the American people. And that's initially whitewashing, which is a terrible thing. The undisclosed sort of elephant in the room is the hierarchical lineage to all this technology. Sure, the West has invented all this technology, but at what cost? There is some sort of hidden allusion and consistent reference to the historical teachings that the West and the world has come about to this date, like colonization and slavery and internment camps. These things are all taught in school, but we have to know that so it doesn't happen again. But it is still being used as a positive structure, and making sure that the lineage here is such that we can only reproduce it, and we can only produce better innovation if we continue this sort of ideology that you are indeed inferior and your lineage doesn't hold the ability to create these innovations. The problem with that is saying that, hey, we can be the number one country and have this military threat and innovate all this and give it to the world. But if we want to make something even better than them, well, we're going to be marked as a threat. And anyone else who follows that ideology will be put into homelessness because they don't follow America's interest. And that's what the elites talk about. As I mentioned a couple seconds ago, if you do not have this interest to make your nation number one, then you are going to be defamed and told your company is no good for the sale or procurement of additional contributions to society. And if you don't look white American, then you have to represent your nation. So you have this opportunity here in the USA to consistently feed the number one economy that sanctions the military terrorists all around the world and says that, hey, we are watching your little group of people and your country, and they seem to have made a derivative off American culture, and we're going to sanction them so that doesn't go into USA and white Americans start thinking we're not going to be able to contain and maintain this number one position. which is ultimately anti-competitive competition. If you look at the very bank situation where you are trying to get a loan for your company, you have to show that you have made sales within the first year. Well, that's an incentive to let you know that you are probably a good person or a bad person. That bad person is your ability to create an aesthetic that people will like to buy. So if you don't really have the ability to say that the bank can see these statements of sales and a good profit margin, well, the bank that ultimately loans out money from your having cash in a checking account in the first place isn't going to lend that out to you. And it's a huge problem because these small little niche communities have to change their whole American perspectives and their immigrant perspectives into an American one where their nation is ridiculed by poverty because America ultimately said you are going to be sanctioned if you do anything like that. And that basically would be summed up with social gatekeeping and institutional gatekeeping. You have to have high marks, high this, good that, just to get into a good elite college. And then you're going to be told that you also have to follow this culture of gatekeeping and telling everyone, hey, you have to have this sort of identity, otherwise your contribution to society will be considered terrorist, Hispanic racial slur, African racial slur, Chinese racial slur, Indian racial slur. So if you learn from the country that is standardizing the world in humanity and innovation standards, and then you know that you're going to be sanctioned if you continue, but you come to the USA and you learn, you're trapped here as well. So what should we do? We should hit the like and follow below because I talk about how you can develop a rhetoric that could ultimately tell them that you're copywriting this so that you can ultimately build a future without having to ever deal with them, even with these presence all over around the world. Sure, the money is great in the USA, it's very valuable, but who wants to do that where you constantly go outside and have a majority of them, which deportation ultimately rules that you won't ever be a majority, to say that you're this and that because he felt like his lineage and legacy elites are telling him you can't be doing that because we invented it. And if they feel like you're making some progress in the USA, well, they're going to start holding their money and then they're going to start saying their country is going to, or the number one country is going to nuke you by some voting party. And they also think they know how many things work that they were taught in school. This also goes back to how there is a consistent reminder that the internet was supposed to have everyone access to information that everyone is accustomed to being together and then formulate a plan that everyone would be happy. They didn't have the technology to formulate all that data, but now they have AI and they're using AI to further say that the lineage that created AI was the Western world and European descendants. So we are not having everyone feel comfortable and make money here in the USA. And that is the problem of this video that is ultimately all about you can't do squat about it because, well, we're making a rhetorical device here or rhetoric here that we can actually do whatever we want and copyright it, use his own system and tell them, well, we're going to be doing whatever it is we want, which is why East Asia is such a huge threat. Not mentioning Japan or Korea because Japan and Korea have their military assisted by the USA, so they're good people who ultimately get the women knocked up quite often. So I just talked about a little bit about biological erasure and institutional techniques to get rid of the competition in this forced competition of capitalism. That being said, if you know about history, Vietnam, you were invaded because you had some communist intent and you ended up winning. So now I'll go into the illusion of competition, where either the church or the government or the state comes into a conclusion and says that we need some sort of opposition to create a scenario where we'll be able to have a convoluted dialogue about producing the best innovation to today's problems. Today's problems are such that meditation and all that calm stuff is not exciting enough and it doesn't produce any problems that would produce innovation. So they go back to doing whatever it is they do and have exemplified individuals for the rest of eternity in their written down system of something that happened or got somebody. Elites get the idea that they should ultimately create scenarios like this so that they can ultimately produce more innovation. But innovation comes from gathering all the information that you could possibly do. So what am I talking about here? Well, first of all here, the crime, people need jobs and there needs to be some sort of solution to the problem that AI was supposed to solve. People are still committing crime because they feel that AI doesn't ultimately solve the problem of being together or being isolated from the together motion. That's a problem. And so through social engineering, we can have capitalism create more rich and more wealthy and more middle class, but at what expense? As you can see, AI has already taken a lot of jobs, but some companies have gone back and revisited hiring people and talent for the main contribution to society, people and their purchasing power. And so, as we know, with many things from the start of Fox News and other news outlets like them, we know that someone in a higher position has most of the news channels saying the same lines throughout the entire country. Either it is because they are fortifying that every nation should be a unit that is recognizable when they're out on the streets, or either they're saying the government has a unit sort of centric idea on how the world should work with their military and sanctions ability all across the world with their new surveillance technologies on your phones and devices. Not being so paranoid here, but it is something that people have seen that their nations have been sanctioned because of innovation or a group of people who have a very nationalistic or view, and they become this ability to produce innovation that is significantly identified as their own nation. It would be to say that the military presence saying that if you don't follow the capitalism democracy and you start being communist, you're going to be invaded is like a but these guys are just trying to produce their own innovation and be rich themselves because they're so frustrated, and their little communities and ideations, innovations are sanctioned, and the ones who are good enough get rejected by the copyright administration because they say, well, you're going to get some. And they also defame your production of marketing if it is a successful sort of application. And that is the illusion of competition, because everyone on the news is on about how there will be something in the future that's worthwhile, but the competition is such that the lineage doesn't agree that these people should all have an opportunity, because capitalism won't ultimately be fulfilled in that manner. All right, now that we know we have covered the atrocities of America and the atrocities of trying to use AI to have everything together, we can also discuss how there is no permission in having the ability to land in any nation. If we have artificial intelligence and all these other reasons to signify that the lineage is the one who made the artificial intelligence from the West to be satisfied in a condition that everyone else won't be able to succeed, then we can say that there is no permission anywhere and you can still achieve that, but people will be sanctioned and surveilled if they are permissionless and trying to achieve number one in this anti-competitive competition. I'm not saying you can't compete, which is why I'm making this channel about rhetorical devices that you can actually win in a situation to produce copyright that will use against him in front of his face. I'm saying that there is this constant addition of containing your energy into a little position where you'll just be a subservient consumer and you'll get some cash for it and you'll buy whatever it is that is the West. And anything that you buy from the East will be defamed, told that you look like a racial slur, or told that you are inferior, or be threatened by a nuclear weapon. Any of these possibilities that you won't be able to achieve your goals is happening. There is the implication of no entity owning it, but there are many individual entities who have ownership to many of the intellectual properties, and that is a competition that we're unable to really fathom. So I want to conclude by saying, to defeat the rhetoric that keeps individuals trapped, you must recognize professional leverages and social influence are deeply intertwined. Legacy systems use manufactured narratives to dictate who commands authority, who holds social premium, and how influence is distributed across professional and personal arenas. Flip this dynamic by anchoring your value in absolute, undeniable competence and structural independence. When you control your own infrastructure, financial destiny, and distribution, you no longer rely on institutional badges to signal high status. This unshakable autonomy naturally translates into massive professional exposure and powerful social leverage, making you entirely immune to the threat of corporate isolation or social gatekeeping. So if you feel trapped in your corporate job or isolating in modern dating or social ecosystem, you are playing a game that is designed to strip your leverage. You might be smart, build leverage, or have systems. You're just playing the cultivation trap where they have funded you, giving you education, giving you promise, opportunity, so that they can say they'll be sanctioning you if you are competing with them. The only thing to do is know rhetoric that will ultimately give you the ability to start producing copyright material that you can also share with your independent nations, as there are only 250 or so in the world. You can ultimately win in competition by knowing that the USA's ultimate presence with military sanctions and tariffs and taxes aren't going to be any sort of situation where you can't be a millionaire or number one yourself. Think of it as a Buddhist perspective where you can ultimately achieve nirvana without a right mindset to give confidence to produce copyright materials that will be shown and shoved in their faces that they have to uphold their system that they are standardizing. If you like this video, hit the like and subscribe and see you in the next.